From mating tools together, the unstoppable floods, to self-made tools. In today's video we have MK6 VW Golf with 2-liter TDI engine and with automatic gearbox. This car has issue with the flywheel and it has started to knock. This job is estimated to be done in 6 hours, so without any further ado, let's dive in. First, let's put aside this engine cover, followed by disconnecting air mass flow sensor, then this vacuum pipe, now we need to remove all intake airbox assembly, including this pipe, which typically comes out pretty easy, but when somebody is looking at your hands or how you're working, nothing goes smooth. Then we need to take this molding out. There's 2 clips, one on each side that needs to be pressed in, and then that molding comes out. Now this air intake hose clamp, and last there's one T30 bolt right in the corner there that needs to be also removed. I've seen a lot of people trying to pull the air intake box upwards and they break it, so by disconnecting it should come more easy. And here we can see there's 2 of these rubber grommets and T30 bolt. Now the battery cover. The battery itself needs to come out, so we're disconnecting the negative terminal first. We put this cover on, and positive terminal now. And last, the battery clamp that is held in by 13mm bolt. That's the clamp with the bolt. And the battery itself can come out now. On some VWs there is this clip that holds this positive cables, wires to the battery tray, some don't. Now we can remove battery tray that is held in place by 3 10mm bolts. Once those bolts are removed, the battery tray can now come out. It hooks behind these wires, so the way we remove it, the same way we're going to put it back inside. Now we're going to lift the car up. As this is automatic gearbox, the gearbox oil is cooled down by the engine coolant. Gearbox oil is cooled down by the engine coolant, so it is a good time now to drain the coolant out. We leave the tray underneath and let it drain while we're working on the top. Now this is the earth strap. Now the starter motor, there's a cover that covers the positive terminal to the starter motor and the starter motor plug. There is a red clip that needs to be pushed away from the starter motor, and then you can press it and the plug comes out. Now 13mm nut that holds positive wire to starter motor. and did not fall down. Well, I will get it later on when we remove starter motor completely. Now there's the gear selector cable. It held in by this clip. It's easy to remove. Just flip this side slightly upwards and pull the clip out. Very good design. And it can be disconnected from the gear selector. Then there's two bolts that holds the cable to the gearbox that also needs to be removed. That is held in by M10 bolts. So I got this tool, but when I put it inside, it leaves basically no space to put the ratchet, and even when the bolt's gonna come out, it's even gonna be tighter. So what I'm gonna do, I have this small socket here with a 10mm socket. And by putting the old glove in between them, you can use a bag or paper towel, anything to hold that socket inside. Just press them together. You can use little hammer tabs or vise to hold them together. Here we can see how much space it's gonna give us extra. And there the bolt itself. Usually on these gearboxes or engines, once you crack the bolt, they come out by fingers. You can screw out. Very rarely when they coming out stiff. And that's the second bolt out. Now we can put this cable somewhere aside, out of our way. Now there's some cables underneath the starter motor, so I decided to disconnect these coolant hoses to give more space and better footage for the video. So if you do, you might get by not removing, but if you want more space, you can do exactly the same as I'm doing here. Keep in mind, although we drain the coolant out, there might be still some left in the pipes. There's a clip that holds this plastic pipe in the bracket. And to disconnect it, I use the long nose pliers to press those two clips together on the side, and with little wiggle it came out. I thought I'm gonna struggle for longer, but luckily it came out pretty easy. It's just hard because you can't see in which angle you have to press it. Now the pipe can come out. We can lift it upwards, and there you go. As I mentioned before, there could be still coolant inside in those hoses. So I'm just gonna block this pipe for any extra spillage that can come out. Now these two coolant pipes, that goes to the oil cooler for the gearbox oil. I use the Spigot to break the rubber from the intake pipe, as if you try to move it straight away, it just doesn't come out easy. put some towels underneath just in case there's any more coolant come out. Came out a lot, and I understand I needed more paper towels. Once the coolant start coming out, that's indication that you break all the rubber from the pipe. Now moving this back and forwards, and same time I apply pressure to move the pipe outwards. Here I understand there's a lot of coolant still coming out. I use this vacuum pump to suck the coolant spillage out, with the thought to make less mess on top of the gearbox. And as I disconnect this pipe, it just starts pouring out. Did not definitely expect so much coolant still coming out from these pipes. On these new VWs, Audis, Seats and Skodas, there's couple auxiliary pumps and valves, one-way valves, and at some point they open and they close, and to my understanding you meant to connect computer to open all these valves, and then maybe you can get all the coolant out. But I did it old school, and this is what I got. So keep in mind, if you do the same job, maybe get some tray underneath it just before you're removing pipe to catch all that coolant. It saves you hassle cleaning it. Yeah, these towels did not help much. I use again the vacuum pump just to suck out these small puddles that collect on top of the gearbox. You can leave them there, but once you're gonna try to remove the gearbox, all that's gonna spill either on you or on the floor or inside the gearbox housing or any other components, and it doesn't take much time if you have this pump. Now to remove starter motor, you can use 16mm socket or size 8 Allen key, as these screws are designed to disconnect in two ways, as I can showing here. I sprayed WD-40 bracket that holding cables together for easy removal or disconnecting. So there's a pin underneath, small, that you need to press upwards. I use the mirror to locate it, and screwdriver to pry it towards myself. Sometimes they're rusted, so they can't be really stiff. That's why I recommend spraying some grease or some silicone type to help you out with removing it. Then there's push clips, 2 of them for these cables. It's one remove, and then there's another one underneath lower. Then there's another cable sitting in like a closure that you open and lift the cable upwards and it just comes out. It's hard to see from this angle, but if you do the same job you will see it and you will understand how easy to come out. And this connection is also pushed into the bracket. There is a two 10mm nuts to remove whole bracket completely, but I decided just to disconnect all these cables separately. And now the cable for the automatic gearbox brains, and you just turn it anti-clockwise. As you're turning it, the plug comes loose, and you just pull it towards yourself and keep turning anti-clockwise until it disconnects completely. So basically it's on this position and you turn it anti-clockwise and it comes loose. Now once all the cables is away, we can get access to the bottom 16mm bolt for the starter motor. That's one bolt removed, and the second one is here at the top. That has easy access. And starter motor is out. Oh, and there's my 13 nut for the live wire that goes to the starter motor. Now what's left at the top is 3 bolts for the gearbox bell housing that attach to the cylinder block. They are 18mm bolts or multi-spline sockets. Can't remember exactly, but I think they're M12 or M14, and one right where the starter motor sits inside. So usually a lot of people miss this one and they thought they remove all around the bell housing and the gearbox doesn't come loose, because a lot of times that bolt not being removed. So the way I'm gonna remove these bolts is using 18mm socket, then this ball joint flex connector and extension. The other way around it is to remove the gearbox oil cooler, but I don't like to disturb it at those gaskets that sits underneath. They're not very reliable and they tend to leak a lot. So because trying to save customer as much as possible money, we're not going to disturb it and doing this way. But if you do this job and you have extra 10-15 pounds, maybe $20 in US, you can put the new gasket for that cooler as well, as maintenance prevention procedure. That was one bolt out. Now move to the another one. As you crack them loose, as I mentioned before, on VWs they always comes out easy. That's the second one out. They're all same length, so it doesn't matter if you put the same bolt in the same location or you mix them. So, and the third bolt is also out. Now we've done everything at the top. Now we can lift the car up and start working on underneath the car. First, let's remove the wheels. Then this inner liner. If you watched one of my previous videos where I'm doing same thing for Audi A3 convertible, it is exactly same design for these inner wheel arches. They're held in by 5 bolts from the inside of the wheel and 2 underneath. Not bolts, more like screws. Now the hub bolt can remove and see if the driveshaft pushes inside, if it's not seized there. You block the brake disc from spinning and you can remove driveshaft bolts like so. That's the bolts. They all are M8. There are 6 bolts that hold this driveshaft to the driveshaft flange. You can use electric tools or air tools to speed up the process. Once all 6 bolts are removed, we can see the driveshaft is free now. Now the center hub bolt can come out completely. And we need to disconnect this arm. So to do this we need to remove these 3 16mm nuts for the bolt joint. My smaller gun didn't take it, so I took the bigger one. Usually they come out easy if somebody has over torqued them, so then they tend to take a little bit more beating to get them out. Now we can push the driveshaft from the hub, and that's one side driveshaft is out. Now once it stops draining coolant, we can connect now back this pipe, as we're gonna work now underneath the car so it doesn't drip on our heads. Now I also gonna remove this intercooler pipe, as we can see how close it is to the gearbox, and once I'm gonna try to remove the gearbox, I'm 100% sure it will not gonna let me. You can also try to remove the rest of the plastic pipe that goes up and around the gearbox. So I decided it could be alright if I leave it there. Now we can move to the left side driveshaft. Now this cable bracket for the oil level sensor. Now the oil level sensor plug itself, we can disconnect it, and we're just gonna tuck it there inside, out of the way. Gives us a little bit more space to disconnect these driveshaft bolts. And again, it's 6 of them. You can use ratchet, or you can use electric tools or air tools to speed up. Same thing. And that is the left side driveshaft out, or here in UK, the offside or driver side. We also need to remove this driveshaft flange. It's held inside by a 6mm Allen key bolt. As if you leave it on some cars, you can try to remove it, you can leave it on and try to take the gearbox off, but 8 out of the 10 cars I had before that it just catches behind the flywheel. And once you have the heavy gearbox on your hand or on a stand and you need to remove this flange, it can give you a hard time. Now there's a small cover held in by 10mm bolt, just some kind of dust shield. And now we can see a little bit of flywheel, and if the flange would be right there, as you try to pull it away from it, it will hook behind that flywheel. Now this 18mm bolt for the gearbox, another 18mm bolt on front of the gearbox, And the smaller bolts, there's 3 of them underneath the car, underneath the gearbox. I think there were 16 mil bolts. Now 21 bolt for gearbox dog bone mount. Once you crack them, you can use the electric tool to speed up. And 2 16 mil bolts on the gearbox end. And the dog bone can slide out. There's another bolt right here. This leaves us with one last bolt here that we're gonna remove just before we're ready to take the gearbox off. Now we can support the gearbox, the engine. On this occasion, it's best if you have 2 gearbox jacks, as our second one broke down, so I have only one. But if you have somebody who can help you, then use their help definitely. 18mm bolts for this gearbox mount at the top. I'm using it slowly so the engine and the gearbox doesn't drop suddenly down. In case that gearbox jack slips or collapses, then it's definitely gonna break everything. Once slowly removed and the gearbox and engine is secured, you can move to the bottom bracket for the gearbox mount that is held in by 4 16mm bolts. You can pull out all the bolts, and after we can take this bracket out and it should come out without any problems. Now we're getting back on the floor, and you definitely, at this point, if you don't have second gearbox jack, you ask somebody for help to remove the gearbox. That's the last bolt out, so basically the gearbox now is just held in place by locating pins. Here we tried to remove it, but we understood it's seized on those locating pins. So you can use a screwdriver or a pry bar to pry it loose. But keep in mind, once you lose from those locating pins, there's a possibility that the gearbox can suddenly drop. So whoever is holding it has to be ready to keep it in place. And here we can see that intake pipe, black one, was not letting me to put the gearbox towards me to get it out. So slight hiccups there, but we managed. So this pipe was not letting to get it easy out. Now we can remove flywheel itself. Remember, flywheel is also pretty heavy, and once it's been living there for a couple of years, it's gonna be stiff to come out. You can use a screwdriver or pry bar again to pry it off. Here I was not bothered to get it one, I just bang it on each side. To move it back left and right, as soon as you start moving, you can apply pressure towards yourself. That's all off. Here I noticed there's a pilot bearing in the middle, or Spigot or Spigot bearing, different people call it different ways. And we made this self-made tool to get it out, as we don't have any tools to remove this in the garage, as we don't come across them often. So we took the old cylinder head bolt, we grind the middle off, put the pin inside, and as you bang it inside, the pin pushes inside and opens the bolt and prevents it from coming out again. We use the socket, and now we're just gonna use the ratchet, and it's gonna pull the bearing out. It took us around 4-5 attempts till we get it right, but if it works, it works. As once the car is stripped down, and to get it tooled straight away is pretty hard within minutes or hour times. Accidentally knocked the camera. And that's it, the bearing is out. There's also a method where people saying on the internet you can use the bread to keep stuffing it inside and it's gonna push out, but I did not want to try that method. And here we can see how it worked. Now I can put the new bearing inside. I use 14mm socket, and with the small taps I tap the bearing back inside its place. Just keep in mind, before you remove the bearing in the first place, just pay attention how deep is inside, as when you're gonna put the new one you just put it in the same position as the original was inside. Now the flywheel can go back inside. There's only one way this flywheel can be fitted. It's recommended to tie these bolts in a star-cross pattern. I lock the flywheel with 2-bolt method, preventing from spinning in when I'm gonna torquing in now the flywheel bolts. So the spec is 16 Newton meters first. Pretty much electric ratchet did it. It was like 58 and it started moving then. Once all of them is torqued to the 60, then there's extra 90 degrees angle that needs to be torqued. And again you go in a cross pattern, and it torqued or somewhere around 130 Newton meters of torque. Now we can put the gearbox back inside. Again, this automatic gearbox is pretty heavy, so if you've never done gearboxes before, I would not recommend you to try it, as you can damage a lot of parts, and if you drop the gearbox and something happens to the gearbox, even worse. And that's gearbox inside. I'm gonna put that last bolt that I removed last one, the first one to go inside. And as soon as that inside, you can let go the gearbox and it's gonna be holding in place. Now I'm gonna support a little bit gearbox as I don't have other jack, and as I'm lifting the engine upwards you can see the whole car lifts as well. It is pretty dangerous, but at this point I did not have any other choice. So now basically everything is in reverse process. You can again ask somebody to guide the gearbox from the bottom to align these top 3 bolts. I recommend you to first get the threads going with the fingers to not cross thread them, and then use the ratchet or any electrical tools or air tools to tie them. Now we can take the gearbox jack away, and here we can see how much the whole car was lifted upwards. All the gearbox bolts, the dog bone goes inside, the bolts for the dog bone mount, 2/16 and 1/21. These bell housing bolts or gearbox bolts, the clip for the boost pipe, intercooler pipe or boost pipe. Pipe goes itself. As you hear the clicks, you know it's inside. Then you tie the Jubilee clip. Now this backing plate for the flywheel that is held in place by 10mm and 18mm gearbox bolt. Now this driveshaft flange, and I mentioned before it is spring loaded, so you have to push it with one hand to catch the threads and then screw it inside. Now the left driveshaft can go inside. I located it inside the hub first. Then the hub bolts, and also located the ball joint at the bottom. Once those are located, for me it is much more easier to put now the driveshaft bolts inside. And you tight all 6 bolts. If you're using any electrical tools or air tools, I always recommend to double check it with hand, as you don't want these bolts to come loose. Now the oil level sensor wiring bracket and the plug itself. So the spec for the center hub bolts, there's 2 types. If you need, you can pause it and see what specs is going to be on yours. On my one is 70 Newton meters first, and then 90 degrees. What they're saying, you meant to put car on the floor and then torque it. I decided to go this way by blocking the brake disc. The ball joint bolts and the right side driveshaft can go inside now. Same procedure. Locating the hub, the ball joint nuts at the bottom, and the CV joint to the driveshaft flange. Again here, try to first get the threads inside by hand before you using any tools, any power tools. And let's not forget to torque this side as well. Now this inner liner go back inside. Tires, wheels. Now we're back on the top. These 3 bolts at the top for the bell housing to the engine block. I don't know the spec for them, but just tight. Not over the head tight, but tight. Now the starter motor can go back inside. 2 bolts for it, one at the top, one at the bottom. The cable management at the bottom of the starter motor. And the gearbox plug. And again, as you're locating, you turn it clockwise and it tightens itself inside or pushes itself inside. Just double check a couple times it is secured correctly, and don't rush it. If it doesn't go nicely, just pull it out to make sure the pins are aligned correctly, as we had before when the customer came and they had issues with the gearbox, and eventually what was found out, there's nothing wrong with the gearbox, it was actually the plug was damaged. Now the live wire for the starter motor, the cover and the plug again, the surge strap, and 13mm nut at the top, the gear selector cable, slide on this gear selector pin, and then the securing pin, it just slides like so. Now these two bolts are for the bracket. The coolant hoses can go back on. The coolant hoses to the battery and to the coolant bridge. And the all hose clips. Now the battery tray, again, it has to be hooked behind these cables or wires, and once you get past that point, it should slide pretty easy in. There you go. Those three 10mm bolts. And the battery. The battery clamp that is held in by 13mm bolt. The cover for the battery. First we connect the positive strap or positive terminal, and then negative. Now the air filter housing or air box can go inside. Make sure it clips nicely. This vacuum pipe. Air mass flow sensor plug. And rest of the assembly for the air intake. Now the engine cover can go back inside, and fresh coolant or antifreeze. You can start the car up, make sure it runs nicely. One of the best engines for working horse cars. That's all there was to it. It took me longer than 6 hours to complete this job, as I had to do other tasks around the garage, including dealing with customers, but I'm sure that this is possible to do within specified time, and if you do cars on daily basis, then I bet that this job can be done even in shorter time. I'm gonna go now for a road test to make sure all the gear shifts nicely, and on this note I would like to say thank you for watching this video. If you like the video, I would appreciate if you press thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos about car repairs, subscribe to my channel, as more videos on the way. Your valued mechanic out.